Hi there, I'm Dre, the host and founder of the Dragon Network. Welcome to this week's video. In Health IT, we spend quite a bit of time focused on the concept of interoperability and how to exchange data from one system to another, whether that be between systems within the same organization or between different organizations. For today's video, I want to keep that focus on interoperability, and I want to talk about the International Patient Summary Project and really highlight what that project is all about, what the principles behind the development are, and where we might see some challenges along the way with developing the standard and, more importantly, with implementing the standard globally. So let's get started. There's an international group called the Global Digital Health Partnership, or GDHP, that was formed a little while ago and actually involves 30 different countries as well as representation from the WHO. This group is a government-to-government health IT partnership that's focused on supporting digital health implementations, creating standards that can be utilized, and discussing best practices between countries. So it really is taking a look at global healthcare in the context of IT and in the space of IT, and sharing everything they know and working in partnership to develop things together. So within this GDHP, there is now an International Patient Summary Work Group. The formation of this group is actually something that was developed over several years. There were initiatives between some of the WHO member states, different country-to-country partnerships, the European Union had tried some things, all looking at how they would share patient information, critical patient information, in the event that a patient crossed borders and needed to receive care somewhere else. So over time, these activities became more and more prevalent, and it became more important for everyone to sort of work together and communicate together. So GDHP created a patient summary working group where they could actually dive in and focus their attention. This work group kicked off in December of 2020. So it hasn't been around for that long. It's just under a year now, but they meet bi-weekly, and there are 17 countries that are involved in this particular work group, as well as representation from the WHO. The purpose that this group gathers for is so that they can together collaboratively design a minimal, non-exhaustive patient summary that is specialty agnostic, condition independent, and readily usable by all clinicians for unscheduled cross-border care of a patient. The design of this document is going to be focused on the CDA Release 2 architecture as well as the FHIR Release 4 architecture, so that it can be exchanged by a broad number of participants in the global space, so as many countries as possible. They're going to base it on those two standards and create implementation guides for the two standards. They're also going to define what the contents are for that international patient summary. The guiding principles that are being followed for the development of this international patient summary, or IPS, are that it will be implementable using existing standards. So they don't want to create net new standards to introduce to the global community, that it will rely wherever possible on solutions that have already been implemented or are ready for implementation in as many countries as possible, and that they consider in the design additional solutions as they become available. So the design of the solution needs to be structured in such a way that it has the ability to grow over time. So it can't be stuck in a moment of time. The standard specification needs to be applicable to global use. It can't be restricted to only a handful of countries or only a specific area. In order to support global use, they also want to be able to incorporate free text or unstructured data, as well as the structured or codified data. Again, this is so that wherever possible, they're removing some of those barriers that may exist. So the wealthier countries with their e-health initiatives are quite a bit further ahead with their data codification and with their interoperability efforts than some of the other global countries. So they want to make sure they're not isolating the international patient summary when the standard is finally developed and when the design is there, so that it's only usable by a certain very, very elite subset of countries. They want it to be as global as possible. The standard specification needs to be extensible and open for future use cases and for future solutions. With this, the working group is really looking to apply common content to the IPS that could be extended or specialized for localized use if required, but that there's a base set of common content that really is something to build upon. This concept is one of the guiding principles of the fire standard itself, so it makes sense for them to incorporate this principle into anything they design that's based off that standard as well. The final guiding principle that they are using to design the International Patient Summary is that it must be sustainable. It has to be sustainable through maintenance and update processes, and it has to make sure that it can be sustainable through different requirements that exist in the healthcare space with respect to clinical requirements, documentation requirements, and quality requirements. So they can't create, or they're trying not to create, a document and a design standard that would need to be completely revisited or revamped or rejigged each time one of those standards changes, again, across the largest number of countries possible. So in the first year that they've been going, let's take a look at what they've come up with so far with respect to the composition. So keep in mind this is being developed for HL7 CDA Release 2 and for FHIR Release 4. So the IPS composition consists of 4 different layers. The first layer is the header, and it is going to contain information about the subject or the patient that the International Patient Summary is really focused on, the author of the document, the attester that the information inside the document is correct, as well as the custodian. So really the provenance of the entire document is going to be maintained in that header, so you know who it's about, who it was written by, and where it's coming from. The next 3 layers are the content themselves, and they are structured in such a way that there are requirements or mandatory components, as well as recommended components, and nice to have or optionals. So this is very similar to the way all of the other design standards are done for individuals that have the ability to include a more robust information and have that information readily available in a digital format. That's great if they can include it, but we have to keep in mind that not everyone has that. So the working group has identified for the required section that a medication summary be included, information on allergies and intolerances, as well as a problem list, which is a list of current active diagnoses and conditions that the patient has that are relevant to the receiver. So the next layer is the recommended layer. That would include immunizations, a history of procedures such as surgical interventions, medical devices. So if there are implants that are present with the patient, a pacemaker, for example, or a joint replacement, as well as diagnostic results. So again, it's meant to be a summary. It's not meant to be an all-inclusive health record. It is meant to be a snapshot in time to give the receiving entity information, again, for emergent, non-planned, unscheduled cross-border care. The optional categories that they are looking at are vital signs, past history of illness, pregnancy for females, social history information if it's available, functional status, plan of care, and any advance directive information that may be relevant. So with this, again, it's just in development. They've only been working on it for a little under a year. So the 17 countries and the WHO are gathered together regularly to talk about how they can structure this and how they can come up with these implementation guides. When it's going to be finalized and when it would be actually implemented is an unknown at this time, but it is exciting that they're actually working on this. One of the things that we can't help but think about as they're developing this, so I mentioned earlier that one of the guiding principles is that they use value sets and code sets that are accessible to all, and they try not to restrict those. So they want to try not to restrict those by cost, but they also need to make sure they're not restricting them by geographical area or by country based on regulations. So one of the most challenging things I think that they're going to come across in the design of this patient summary document is figuring out what codification standards they are going to use, because all of the data elements that they're looking to include, if they go all the way down to the optional level, there isn't necessarily an international codification standard that is in place. And if there is, so if you look at something like ICD, there are regional code sets that are layered on top of those. If you look at those and try to make them global, it's going to be difficult in some of the cases, I think, to find what they would code. And the most challenging one that I anticipate is one that I've been looking into lately for another project that I'm working on, and that is the codification behind pharmacy medications. So within almost every single country, there are different codification standards for the medications. And if you're including a medication summary as a required element, it will be interesting to see what this group determines to be the standard. And from that, in order for countries and entities and organizations to actually implement and start exchanging this international patient summary, there's an extremely high likelihood that there's going to have to be some additional IT work that is done from a mapping perspective. So whether you're mapping your database directly or whether you're creating a crosswalk table to be placed on top of it or in reference to it, that is yet to be seen, and we'll have to keep an eye on that. But it will be important going forward as we move towards interoperability in a more global sense. It's going to be important to keep an eye on what standards this group is starting with, because they are focused on having these be scalable standards. And again, the representation of this GDHP group is pretty broad. And the US and Canada are absolutely members of this group, including members of the International Patient Summary Work Group. So we are likely to see the results of this IPS work group, their standard choices. We're likely to see these ripple into other areas of IT. So I'm not going to dive into the actual HL7 CDA R2 standard or the FHIR R4 standard with this. I just wanted to provide a brief contextual overview of what the International Patient Summary is. This is one that I'm going to be following over the course of the next couple of years to see how they develop, and it's really the code sets and the value sets that they're going to choose that I'm most interested in, because I think those are going to have the biggest impact on us as far as health IT staff goes. So that's all I have for today's video. As always, if you like the type of content that I'm putting out there, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the videos that you find helpful. If you do have questions or comments, or there's things that you would like to see in future videos, then go ahead and put them in the comments and I will do my best to address them.